Thank you, and thank you to Anandi and Alan and Ruby. I can't see you, so even if you're waving at me, I won't be able to see you, right? Yeah. You have powers to. Oh, okay, great. Okay, well, thank you both, and thank you all, especially my fellow presenters. I learned a lot from what was said yesterday, and I'm actually, like Anandi, going to pivot from text to image. Anandi and Ellen asked me to reflect on my quote unquote curatorial work for the last 10 years. I am, of course, as Ruby introduced me, a card carrying historian. So for me, to take on the mantle of the curator has been a very interesting, very productive experience, which is what I'm going to reflect upon a little bit today. And in the course of my reflection, I reach to the writings of one of my favorite visual theorists, Tom Mitchell, W.J.T. Mitchell, who for the past few years has been writing about getting us to think about images and migration. So a few years ago, he proposed a very firm distinction between the neutral notion of images in circulation moving freely, circulating basically without consequences, and the concept of migration, which suggests something much more fraught with contradiction, difficulty, friction, and opposition. Such a distinction between circulation and migration enabled him to ask, quote, what would it mean to talk about images as migrants, as immigrants, as emigrants, as travelers who arrive and depart, who circulate, pass through, thus appear and disappear, as having a native or original or aboriginal location on the one side, or the illegal alien, the unwanted immigrant on the other. If images are like migrants, do we ask them as they fill out their entry card to check off a box that tells us where they come from, and particularly how to classify them? What group do they belong to? What family do they come from? End quote. So for Mitchell, the migration of images is not merely a metaphor, but also a meta picture, in that it provokes a picture of the way images move, circulate, thrive, appear, and disappear. In a more recent essay, he even insists, quote, migration is central to the ontology of images as such. So building on this insights, I asked what might we gain analytically by considering images as migrant travelers moving about in the world. Under what capacity do they move? How far do they get to go, and at whose bidding? Do images of different genres have correspondingly different efficacious capacities that compel or discourage them from leading a life of mobility? If migration is central to the ontology of images, what is the fate of the image that is not mobile or that comes to a standstill, its travels stalled? Does its image being perish? So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer all these questions at any length in this short reflection, but I want to posit them as I wonder about what I'm calling, riffing off of Milan Kundera's evocative phrase, the unbearable lightness of image travel in our digital age. The virtual image dons the mantle of freedom, seemingly released from material moorings. As more and more of the vast repositories of artworks across the world gets digitized, images are no longer restricted to the walls of the museum or exhibition gallery, nor do we have to necessarily visit these bricks and mortar edifices scattered around the globe, sometimes at great cost. Indeed, at the click of a mouse, we can apparently summon up seemingly any image into our living rooms or onto our computers or phone screens. The image comes to us, even seeks us out. Correspondingly, digitization also appears to spell democratization, apparently allowing images to circulate independent of the checks imposed on them by museums and other agencies of authorization. So In other words, in the age of the digital, every one of us is a curator or can become a curator or has the capacity to become one, right? So this gives me the cue to turn to the first of my curatorial projects that I undertook exactly actually 10 years ago. And it began, as so many of the projects we have heard about here, very much as a collaborative venture, as a transnational enterprise, actually, that was inspired by a wonderful statement of Walter Benjamin's, another of my favorite theorists. Quote, and this actually recalls McDougall's statement as well, "I have nothing to say, only to show. I will steal no valuables, nor appropriate any clever turns of phrase, but the rags, the refuse, not in order to take stock of them, but to use them, which is the only way of doing them justice." End quote. So Tasvirghar, the House of Pictures, came into existence as a project, as a digital site, but above all as a house and a home for stray pictures, in an act of refusal to reject the refuse of history, to invoke Benjamin. So like Benjamin's anonymous rag picker, the chiffonnier, on whom he's written beautifully, we too sought to provide a haven, albeit of the digital kind, for artifacts and images that had long been dismissed as ephemeral, as junk, even trashy. One of our writers even writes about how somebody, when she started to work on this, Kajri Jain, asked her why she was working with these dirty pictures. We did so with the conviction, inspired, of course, by Benjamin, but also by the work of our numerous contributors who came to our aid and whose writings are represented on the website, that the materials that the materialist rag picker collects are the stuff that collective dreams are made of. So over the past decade, we have devoted ourselves to the collection, the analysis, and representation of these image objects of India's vexed entanglement with industrial modernity that were once in circulation and often in large numbers and then cast aside in the refuse bin of history. Rummaging around in this bin, we have put these once productive but now defunct image objects into circulation again to reveal new truths about the past that produced them and the present that recuperates them. So as a curatorial practice, the Tasvirghar is not just collaborative, though very importantly it is that, but it is also dispersed with our authors drawn from across the world in different stages of their professionalization as scholars, but they don't necessarily have to be scholars either. They are involved in the shaping of the look of their exhibition in concert with the team. I can just pull up. Tea was mentioned yesterday. So we do have a wonderful essay on tea here that Philip Lutgendorf has published for us. If I can find it, or maybe not, but let me just pull up Arvind's essay just because it's right here. So they actually, the authors actually help in the shape the look of each of these essays, and you can click on each of these, and there's more information accordingly, you know, as much as you want. The leadership team itself is dispersed across 3 continents. Yusuf Saeed, our principal coordinator and designer, is a filmmaker who lives in Delhi. The other node is in Heidelberg, and the third node is, of course, at Duke. The website is also open-ended. I guess I just closed this, correct? I'm not used, oh, I just closed the site. Not used to working. Do you mind pulling that up? Thank you, and Anandi, I'm sorry, I'm not used to working with Windows. So the website is also open-ended in the sense that it continues to grow and expand, and I wanted to alert folks to a brand new project we have just launched called Manly Matters on masculinity and visual culture in the South Asian context. And here's a list of all our fellows. And we typically begin with reaching out to young scholars first, and we send out a call for proposals. And then in the next phase, we will be inviting senior scholars to also contribute to the project. So it's a growing archive. At various times it's stalled, often because we don't have time or sometimes money. So there is the financial aspects of all of this is also something that has come up frequently. Our galleries allow viewers and users to download the images frequently frequently at high resolution, and redeploy them in their own projects. We ask that users get our permission, and they do, but we don't police this very stringently in the spirit of the manner in which these images have circulated over time. Not least, the images that we house and curate are themselves on the light side with regard to the metadata we are able to provide about them, their origins, their authorship or creatorship. Sometimes even their medium is not often known to us, but we learn about it once we post them and people write into us. And there's actually a space in which we have received over the years many interesting insights and feedback. But the image is also light in the sense that they are mass produced and mass circulated. And this is the one thing we are insisting upon in the site, in the spirit of Benjamin's observations that guide us, that they have to be mass produced images. So they are also relatively inexpensive in terms of the marketplace. I make this point because I want to next turn in the few minutes I have left to my other curatorial project, which could not be more different, both in terms of the sort of images that I worked with, because in contrast to Tasveer Ghar, which is an open-ended project, this is very much a finite project. It is done. I'm not engaged with it anymore. It's also a tightly curated project. It's done now, so I don't go in and change it at all. And it's actually, the images are very, very tightly analyzed and fixed. You can't actually download from the site and so on because of all the ways in which the copyright has worked for the images and the permission use. But my goal in doing this project was to make available to a wider public, and I undertook this very much consciously as a single historian. I was doing a massive project on the introduction of the terrestrial globe into India as object and representation. And for the early modern part of the project, I decided to go digital with it. And my goal was to also do this as a project in public humanities, which I was very interested in doing. And so I undertook this project very much as a public humanities project, but also in order to make very complex arguments about the globe as it enters India available to a larger public. So that was one of the goals. But the other goal was for me to learn to simulate the original viewing environment in which many of these images circulated. So I decided to recreate the form of a Persianate muraka. There is no, I'm not making any claim of argument of authenticity because there is no single muraka which has all these globe images in one place. I have gathered all these images and had used the form of the muraka to curate them. But I was also interested in pursuing what I'm calling, based on Benjamin, image-driven scholarship. So you really have to go and find the text that will help you understand these images. It's the image that actually drives the album. So if you need to learn more about it, there's metadata, a lot of it actually, because these are what I would call, following Boris Groys, strong images and heavy images, because there's a lot that we know about them, where they were produced, who owns them today, and so on and so forth. And then, because I also undertook this as a historian, but a public scholar as well, I have my own little curatorial note on each of these images, right? So the other goal, of course, was when I did this project, I wanted to have one scholarly resource which could be used in my teaching or in my own research, where one could go to find everything and anything that had been said about the globe in Mughal India, but not just Mughal India. The album actually ends with these wonderful contemporary artists who have actually worked. You have drawn upon the Mughal images, right, to rework for a modern period, for a modern times. Hence the point, right, that these may have been images of the past, but they come down to us in the present and can be a source of inspiration. The software that drives this is something that is used in the British Library. In fact, it's the same people, Armadillo Systems in London. The album is actually hosted on their site, though the whole thing is actually on a WordPress site, AdDuke. And what's nice about it is where you can actually play around with it. So this is wonderful zoom. And especially for the Mughal miniatures, you can go in and see in great detail all manner, all these very beautiful Persianate inscriptions. Muzaffar actually found, Muzaffar Alam, and when he and I looked at all this, he found a phrase that he had not even realized was there in one of those paintings. So that's one of the wonderful things, right, about the digital turn, that it allows us to see where our human eye couldn't see before very easily. So that was one of my goals, to combine image-driven scholarship with public humanities, but also very much to try to recreate a lost art of the book, to convince my students that there's other ways in which the book circulated. In this particular case, of course, because I'm doing a Persianate Murakka form, and it closes like this. I wanted them to understand that books are read differently, they look different. Images did not always have to hang on walls, they were actually placed in albums and so on. But I wanted to end by noting that even though this was a virtual project and a digital project, what really got me very intrigued in the course of the project is the materiality of the image. While I was constructing the Murakka, I began to think about what was the size and the density of the paper on which the painting was done. How could I simulate that materiality as I was putting together this object, right? So paradoxically and ironically, I became much more conscious about the materiality of the artwork in actually undertaking the digital turn. So I want to end by going back to Mitchell's opening comments, if I can have just half a minute. So the portability of the Murakka, and the Murakka was, even in its earlier days, a more portable form, but it's really much more portable now because it can be seen anywhere and everywhere. It also has new audiences. The original royal Murakka was only seen by an intimate group of royal visitors to the court. But now it is a public document circulating everywhere and anywhere. But these kinds of things have made me reflect on what I'm calling the unbearable lightness of image travel and the apparent freedom of the digital image. Freedom, as we know, always comes with responsibility. And in this regard, I'm particularly concerned about the responsibility we bear as scholars and as curators, and as scholars like myself who turn into curators. My curatorial work over the past decade has convinced me even more strongly of the importance of ensuring that the digital image remains strong. And I'm drawing on the theorist Boris Groys as I make this point. It's imperative that their identities not be destabilized or dispersed, especially as a consequence of their apparently free movement. This means we need to honor their origins, their biographies, their trajectories of travel, and consciously work against putting them at risk or in danger of misappropriation and misuse. Further, to recall, Mitchell, if movement is central to the ontology of images as such, taking care of images means that we don't do anything to halt their travel and their circulation, that we keep them in motion all the time. But not least, taking care of digital images in the age of the virtual means recognizing that images too have rights that can't be taken away from them by converting them too quickly into language or taken over by the very technologies that have apparently set them free. Thank you very much.